Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about reflexivity and research reflexivity. These are notions that we have briefly discussed in the past, but we will get into the nitty-gritty of the origins of reflexivity and how it links back to reflection and what you will be asked to do as part of your research process. And you're asked to do this as a researcher. Of course, your supervisors will invite you to be reflective and to articulate such reflections very explicitly in your work. When you do that, that becomes statements of your positionality in the different stages of your research report, if we're talking about a thesis. Let's have a look at the aims of the session. So, as I said, we're going to be exploring notions around reflexivity, research reflexivity, and most importantly, I want you to think about how you're planning to develop your own research reflexivity. You're in a very early stage, and I think planning in advance is a useful tool to help you in the research journey. This is the overview of the session. So we have 6 stages, and obviously the 6th stage is group work. In regards to the origins of reflexivity, well, we can say that from the 20th century, before even the 20th century, the ideas that were dominant were those ideas of positivism that looked at knowledge and science as those methods that give us really true knowledge. And so there were a lot of experiments. People were looking to uncover the truth about life, about, as I said, knowledge. However, from the 20th century onwards, we've seen movements of social constructivism, social constructionism, social reflection, narration, and we've mentioned this before in our previous class. So these ideas, these movements, we're looking at experiences, human experience, and we can see that very clearly when we look at those studies that are based on, the field of anthropology, sociology, feminism, and also more recently, technological studies. So the idea was to move away from finding the true knowledge, what is true, to look at how we learn as human beings through experience. Understanding that this knowledge is situated in a context, in a moment in time. So let's look at a timeline, history, specific country, specific place, specific culture. So knowledge as situated in a specific context and as experienced and emerging from that experience. So really not focusing on absolute truths, but more on human experiences. And that's where reflexivity sits. So if we look at the ideas discussed from the 80s and the 90s from different academics, we see that reflective accounts became more essential, and people started looking at how to examine critically those experiences that tell us a bit more about human knowledge, that practical knowledge that emerges, as I said earlier, from lived experiences. We also have people like Hardin who's arguing that in order to achieve a strong objectivity, and this is in quotation marks, the idea of gathering critical examination in the research process is important. And I say the strong objectivity in quotation marks because when we talk about reflexivity, we do look at trustworthiness rather than objectivity. So bear in mind that Hardin was talking about these ideas in, as the social movements were happening or in that recent stage. So the idea of trustworthiness developed over time. So what Hardin was saying, well, we need to look at the cultural forces that impact the research and the researcher, and how the research is conducted and written up. So these are very, the origins of the notions of reflexivity. And if we go back and visit Smith 2011, we look at that she then started, she actually continued that conversation in 2011. She's like, yes, we do need to look at the social, cultural factors influencing the research process, those decisions that the researchers and collaborators take, because we need to look at not only the personal and interpersonal, our relationships with others, but how the research is impacting on concepts and theories and methods that are out there. Are you developing a new methodology? Are you extending a new methodology, a new theory? Are you developing your own conceptual understandings, a conceptual framework? And how does this, at the end of the day, impact the political and the social context? So this is how Elizabeth Smith extended those initial ideas on the notion of reflexivity. And we see the relationship between reflexivity and reflection. We've seen that, when reflection is ongoing, spiraling, continuous in a timeline that never ends, and it is something that you can always revisit, then you're looking at reflexivity. And also not only because it is a continuum, but because the purpose of reflexivity is that you are sharing it with others. If you remember the video that we watched in class last time, that idea of reflexivity with X rather than with C is because the main purpose is that you're sharing, you're articulating these ideas very clearly and explicitly when you're writing up your research projects in order to justify that decision-making process. And then reflection, well, yes, if the absolute aim or the ultimate aim is to articulate these ideas, well, you do need to start with that individual introspective reflection to then be able to communicate it to others. So then reflection, the notion of reflection, it's all about bringing those that tacit knowledge, those understandings that you have, assumptions you make, your knowledge, your experience, up to the surface. If we have this figure here that represents an iceberg, then yes, reflection is all about bringing those assumptions, beliefs, emerging knowledge to the surface. And the reflexivity, well, is, we're talking about the idea of articulating these assumptions, attitudes, knowledge to other people. Reflexivity as a continuous activity. As I said, this is, as researchers, you need to become more and more aware that this is not just happening in the planning stage, but in the conducting stage and writing up in the research report should also be and have elements of reflexivity. That dimension of reflexivity is basically in the whole research process, in the whole research journey. We go back to these ideas of, yes, when reflection is looked at in a continuum, then we are linking it to a wider concept, which is reflexivity. And in research and reflexivity, our main purpose is to enhance trustworthiness. We want to be transparent. We want our study to be and to have these elements of credibility, transferability, confirmability, and dependability. And because when we talk about qualitative research, which is where this idea of reflexivity emerged, then we're not looking at validation and all those terms that are used in quantitative research. We're looking at trustworthiness. And trustworthiness involves making your research credible. So how confident the researcher is in the truthfulness of their findings and how you accurately represent the data that you collect. And reflecting on this, well, is thinking about what steps do you take, what is informing those steps, what kind of methodologies you're following, how you're doing it, and more importantly, why. Transferability is also part of trustworthiness, and this is related to how well you describe the context where you are, where your study is situated. You need to allow the readers to determine if they, if that context and what you did in that context could also be implemented or applied in their own. And confirmability. So this relates to how neutral you are in the research. Talking about bias, how you're demonstrated, and the findings that you are uncovering are truly representing the participants' perspectives. And again, we go back to those questions. What are you doing to mitigate this? What are you doing? What methodologies you're following? How these methodologies are informing your own steps that you're taking? How and why? And finally, dependability, how much detail you provide about the steps of the research so that anyone that is also doing research can replicate the findings in different contexts. Now, reflexivity in research and its dimensions is another key topic that we are looking at in this session. And yes, if you read the literature from the 2000s, early 2000s to today, let's say more recent literature, the 2020s, 2021, and 2023, the idea of trustworthiness comes and pops along a lot. That's not to say that there shouldn't be reflexivity in quantitative research. On the contrary, nowadays the argument is that also quantitative researchers and mixed methods researchers need to articulate reflexivity more and more, so as to be transparent about what they do, why they do what they do, and how. We have this concept of reflexivity, this understanding of reflexivity that says it means to look, put your lenses back to yourself as a researcher and recognize that you have a responsibility in the study, and you need to also acknowledge your situatedness, so who you are, where you're coming from, what your perspectives are, because those are influencing dimensions and factors that will help you take decisions. Whether you're doing this research as, from scratch by yourself or with others, you do need to acknowledge your own role. More and more concepts, again, they do talk about the complex relationships that we need to look at when we're conducting, planning, and writing up research. And don't forget disseminating research as well. So looking at how knowledge is produced, looking at the different contexts. We go back to Smith 2011, and the domains of being critical, and the awareness of biases and assumptions, as we were mentioning before. Now, more people do say and do, state very clearly that reflexivity is all about thinking, doing, and evaluating research. Thinking, doing, and evaluating research. But most importantly, I would say, questioning those aspects of the research practice. And this idea came across by Day and Corlett and Marvin when they were saying, well, you need to question your reality, your understandings of the nature of knowledge. So what are your paradigms? What's your ontology, epistemology that is informing your positionality, and again, everything that comes afterwards through your decision making process. Those who read the article from Attia and Edge, you read this phrase of, reflexivity is an ongoing, mutually shaping influence. So the influence of the researcher on the research, and the influence of the research on the researcher. And I captured those words in this figure here. Just to give you an example of what Edge and Attia discussed in that article. And they do look at it, they use the term mutually shaping influence, but you can also find that same understanding through a different term, which is the hermeneutic cycle of, the researcher influencing research and the research influencing the researcher. For that hermeneutic reflection, as we were saying, that relationship, Finlay and Sartre do talk about different stages. So you do need to understand that experience can never be fully grasped because again, we're not looking at the truth, we're not looking for the truth, but you're looking at experience, and experience, everyone can experience different things, even though they're living the same event. Yeah. Looking at our prejudices, looking at our interpretations, our understandings, and as I was mentioning before, everything we do is informed by who we are. So keeping an eye on that is important. And the dimension, so if we look at all these concepts of reflections, we can then look at the different dimensions of reflexivity. So people do talk about reflexivity as relational, linguistic, psychological, philosophical, and ecological. Ecological in the sense that it does have clear connections with the sociocultural context or contexts in which we live. What to reflect on? That's very, very interesting. So we have Robson, who talks about the kind of questions we can ask ourselves as researchers. And all these questions are useful to keep in mind as you start planning and conducting research. We will get back to these kind of questions, but I want you to keep an eye on them. And if you can, put them in a folder, because they are going to be really useful when you start choosing what kind of reflexivity you want to focus on for the assignment. And some of these questions might be linked to those types of reflexivity. So we will get back to this point in the future. More questions. So there are about 10 questions that you can see on screen, and yeah, well, you can read them. And as I said, just keep them somewhere very handy. They can be an initial or starting point for your own development of your assignments. Right, let's go to the first group reflective practice. I want you to think about the pre-task, the articles that you read, and respond to the following question there. And back to plenary. So the next point to discuss and to explore briefly is the relevance of reflexivity in research. Now, as some of you mentioned in your group reflective practice, reflexivity is important because it helps us to state clearly what your position is. And if you state clearly your positionality, things might not be misinterpreted. At the end of the day, we don't want our study to be misinterpreted or, misused in a way. Increase credibility of findings, as we were saying before, that notion of trustworthiness, and raise awareness that our values, who we are as people, will influence the research. Okay, again, awareness in the research process. It's also useful and important for the target audience. It will make your report reader friendly. We don't need to be really academic, or writing very academically for, stating and justifying our rationales. Yes, you can support everything with methodological, theoretical literature, but again, the idea is that you do this in a simple way. It gives context to the researcher's voice. We go back to the ideas of feminism, voice, voicing your opinions, who you are, and that's important. So reflexivity involves two dimensions. We have the self-reflexive and the collective reflexive, or self-reflexivity and collective reflexivity. And there should be a hyphen there. So the self-reflexivity involves your subjectivity, as we said, your identity, yourself, the awareness of your power relationships. Now, this now is linking to the collective, your voice and emotions, which again are related to the collective, because we do not live our lives in a vacuum. We do live our lives in context and relation with others. So maybe this arrow should have like it should be a double arrow basically. But yes, so those two dimensions. As part of your subjectivity, understanding the process and the outcomes of doing research and how you are shaping the research is important. Who you are and those relationships of power imbalances that you may have as you are conducting research, how you talk about these relationships, how you voice, the way you manage your interactions, the interactions that you need to undertake in order to be able to conduct research. We won't be able to conduct research without the help of others. And that includes our participants and our supervisors and colleagues or the other research teams. So while you plan, conduct, disseminate research, it's important that you provide a piece of your autobiography to let the reader know who you are. In reflexive research, it is important as well that as you are taking decisions regarding your theoretical perspectives and personal motivations, you are clear about why you are taking specific positions. We go back to the idea of positionality. Emotions. So it does require you to think carefully during your research inquiry, research plan or proposal, as well as in conducting research, how you're feeling, how your feelings are guiding the decisions that you're making, because emotions can increase the uncertainties around research, in research. So you need to be mentally prepared for all kinds of responses coming from the research, even from yourselves. What are your responses as you undertake research? Are you aware of them and how they're influencing your thinking, your decisions? So becoming aware of these emotions, writing about them, because you might feel differently after, having done all your data gathering stage. You might feel different about the research. So that's going to have an impact on it. And going back to the idea of the collective reflexivity, Hallowell and colleagues say research is ultimately a collaboration. Yeah. So what kind of relationships do you have? And how are these relationships managed, sustained, maintained, and how do they influence your role as researcher? More and more people have written about working collaboratively and how it helps to guide researchers to, keep a focus, the focus on the research topic, to select theories, to question assumptions and emotions, and to have that critical friend that we all need as we are engaging in research. So the word becoming does say that, you're always in that continuum of developing as a reflexive researcher. And I like that word, that term, becoming. So a reflexive researcher is the one who has the capacity to conduct and manage the research reflexively. So how are you thinking about your research or reflexivity? What kind of ideas do you have to keep a record, to document your reflexivity? You've discussed this in the past, but I want to show you as well this figure that tell us a little bit more of that reflexivity, that reflexive process. And interestingly, this is where, in the health science and medicine disciplines, this is where there's more work, because these practitioners are always reflecting and conducting group reflective practice. And they came up with this figure, Wilson, James, and Williams, where they try to identify, where the identity, the positionality, and the reflexivity of the researcher is as they are engaging in research. So the identity, what makes you be you, yourself, it is part of you. So that's you as a researcher coming into a project. It's continuous, it's dynamic, it's not, it's not fixed. Your identity is not fixed, because as you live things, you are constantly growing as an individual and developing. And that development is influenced by your reflexivity. So how you reflect on experience, for experience, and in experience, if we go back to the ideas of Shun, that will also feed into who you are. And as you do all this, as you conduct reflexive research, articulate your reflexivity, you document your reflexivity, you'll be able then to write about it and stating very clearly what your position is. So you might not, write a reflective account of your experiences, but you might write rational, that is informed by what you've read, what you experienced, what your beliefs and assumptions are. And that statement then is your positionality, which is informed by your identity and reflexivity. I love that figure. Ways to perform your reflexivity. Well, we have seen some of these techniques last session. If we look back at the article from Elizabeth Smith, 2011. But if you keep a reflective journal or diary, that's one way of helping yourself. But I know you might consider your own ways, which is good. If you have that metacognitive understanding of what helps you learn and keep a record and document your reflexivity, you will make those decisions. And I trust you, and I hope that you trust yourself in that journey, and that you do commit to performing your reflexivity. And of course, your, group reflection, which we do encourage a lot in this unit. So let's go to then our second GRP. And the question to think about and discuss is, how can researchers perform the reflexivity? Think about yourself and what you're planning or how you're planning to perform it. And next week, we'll continue with exploring the research journey and the different stages of planning, conducting, writing up, and disseminating research. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.